Thank you very much. It's really good to be with you on these very high chairs. I'm just going to set up the conversation first with some data from our research about issues of trust and misinformation, which highlight some of the challenges that we're going to hear about from each of our panelists in turn. I'll introduce them properly as we go along. And then we'll get into a discussion about how you deal with the realities, hopefully some practical examples too, and strategies that can help journalists or others looking to get their messages across and build trust. So for those of you who are not aware, the Reuters Institute is an academic institution. We're part of the University of Oxford. We run a fellowship program. We also do research, including the annual digital news report, and I'm just going to use a little bit of data from that to talk about trust. So firstly, what does trust in the media look like? We see incredibly wide variations between countries and across regions when we ask, to what extent do you trust most news most of the time? If we look at Europe there on the left, you can see a little bit more trust in Northern Europe and generally much lower levels in Central and Eastern Europe, particularly some Central and Eastern European countries. One of the things we find is that countries where there is more political division tend to have lower levels of trust. And I'm just going to layer onto this just a few of the countries where people in our survey think that media is politically far apart. And you can see that in most of those places where information is contested, we have a lower level of trust. I picked out the Philippines, Bulgaria, Hungary, United States as examples. What's really interesting, if you look at this next slide, is you can see how trust how politics affects, how polarization in politics affects trust. So this is the United States. People on the left have a relatively high level of trust or average level of trust. People on the left have incredibly low levels of trust. And essentially they're looking at the media and they don't believe what they see. They're more likely to believe things they see on social media or politicians that they like. So that's a sort of an example of divided trust on a left-right spectrum. Compare that with the country with the highest level of trust in our survey, and you can see virtually no sort of divisions in terms of how people perceive the media. So we have very polarized media environments and very unpolarized media environments. And then there are others like Hungary, for example, where it's got more polarized over time. So as Viktor Orban and his allies have taken more control of the media, you can see people on the left distrusting more. So sometimes these divisions, this contested space is about left-right, sometimes it's about pro-Russia or anti-Russia. There are many, many different divisions here. The other issue I wanted to talk about was getting people's attention in the first place. How can you build trust if you don't get people's attention in the first place? And one of the findings of this year's digital news report is that we see increasing proportion of people turning away from the news. So what we call selective news avoidance. Around 4 in 10 say that they sometimes or often avoid the news. And you can see in many of the countries in the region, not all, but many of them, you've seen that really significantly increase over time. And what are the reasons for that? We find people say there's too much politics, too much about big stories that squeeze out other things people would be interested in quite often. And then around a third say that the news makes them feel depressed, brings down their mood. And so we see, many people, even with the war in Ukraine, turning away and getting fatigued with that. I think that's something we're going to kind of pick up. How do you keep people interested in these really important stories? And of course, back to trust. A lot of people say you can't trust any of it, so we're going to turn away completely, or being just worn out by the amount of news. And then the final thing I wanted to mention briefly is around the role of social media in spreading less reliable information and the increased dependence on social media that we see. This chart broadly just shows it's a question we ask about what do you depend on most? Where do you go first for your news? Do you go to websites or do you go to social media? And you can see over time, on the average, across 46 countries, people are increasingly going to social media, and they are less likely to go directly to those sites where you can give them more reliable information. That's very variable. So you have Northern European countries there where there's still that strong brand connection, social media much weaker. But many of those contested areas, those countries with contested information, the Philippines, Bulgaria, Hungary, is where we see the strongest dependence on social media and therefore the biggest danger that unreliable information is going to be spread. And of course, the networks are changing. You know, it's not just about Facebook and Twitter anymore. It's increasingly about Telegram, or it's about TikTok. TikTok's the fastest growing in our survey this year. 40% of 18 to 24s use it for any purpose, but now increasingly for news, and Ukraine was a big part of that. And, you know, in quotes, they always say it's amazing, it's addictive, the presentation is amazing, but they also say it's not very credible. So, you know, we see, particularly in some of these newer networks, the problem of credibility is incredibly strong. So key challenges I think we're going to pick up through the other presentations. Is facts, do facts and evidence, is it enough? Is it going to cut through in divided societies? You know, how do you reach people who are not prepared to listen to your message? What can you do about that? Mainstream audiences often avoiding the news, and you need that connection. How can we engage people with difficult stories and long-running stories like the war in Ukraine? And then in many contested societies, this sort of increasing dependence on social media, where we see unreliable content. So if you'd like to know more, we have our annual digital news report. All the information there is free and open. So we're going to go on and just hear three other quick presentations with different takes on these issues, and then we'll get into a discussion, and then we'll make sure we leave at least 15 minutes for your questions as well. We're going to hear lastly from Adéla Klečková, who's a cyber and information operations expert from the US think tank, the German Marshall Fund. And then in the middle, we're going to hear Zakhar Protsiuk from the Kyiv Independent, who's going to give a perspective on how you build trust and protect trust at a time of war. But first, Alina Zivanovic, who is Digital Strategy Manager at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, is going to give us just some practical examples and case studies of how they've been wrestling with these challenges. I tell you what, we'll do it the other way around. It just makes it more interesting, right? So, so we'll go to Zachary first.
All right. Hello, my name is Zakhar Protsiuk. I'm a Chief Development Officer at the Kyiv Independent. It's the biggest English language publication in Ukraine. So I already told Nic before our presentation that actually there's not much division in the Ukrainian society right now. It's actually the moment of incredible unity. So, but in order not to finish my presentation so quickly, I will just speak a bit about how did we, as an organization that is actually less than a year old, manage to get audience trust, and how do we retain it during the war? So, as you might not know or know, Kyiv Independent is less than years old. It was founded in November 2021, when the staff of the previous biggest English language paper in Ukraine was sacked. The owner fired the whole team for newsroom trying to preserve its editorial independence, and that's how Kyiv Independent was born. Basically, with an idea that we need to start something new, and that was a really good moment to start an English language paper in Ukraine, and it was a really bad moment to kill it for the owner, as the November 2021 was already the time when the invasion was very much a big threat. So Kyiv Independent was born and is here when it's needed the most, right? And when we try to reflect on how we managed to gain trust and how we managed to be where we are right now, is that we were in the right moment, in the right time, with a team that was ready, with an old journalistic tradition despite being a young organization. So one of the things that we kind of reflect now is why we get trust is that speed and the accuracy of reporting gave us a lot of international recognition, which we managed to build upon and use it to attract new audiences and basically speed up that process of people learning about media, getting to trust it slowly, and then reading it on a regular basis. We almost speeded up that process in a couple of months. So this is just very quickly a couple of numbers of Kyiv Independent. Our page views since February. Our main social media platform is Twitter, which grew dramatically since February, from 30,000 followers to 2.2 million. And I think for me it speaks a lot about the quality of journalism, because Kyiv Post, the paper from which the whole team was fired, tried to relaunch. And yet their growth was not even close to what was happening with Kyiv Independent, despite having much bigger capital and investment there. So that's why I think this is a great example of how quality journalism shows itself in crisis. Another important angle of how do we gain trust is that our main financial model is reader revenue. This is a few numbers of our reader revenue model. We have membership, we don't have a paywall, and we do not plan to have it in the near future. Around 40,000 people supported us at least once, and we have around 7.7 monthly members, which support us and give us a lot of, back and forth insights and feedback, and that gives us a lot of freedom. And it's actually quite a unique situation for Ukrainian media that is able to be funded mostly from reader revenue, and we really pressure it and try to build upon it. So just a few numbers of how our membership was growing. Monthly membership numbers got wrong. Some butchered here, but the point here was that despite seeing a lot of growth in membership model at the beginning of the war and having some drawback, it started growing again in the summer, which gives us a good insight and hope that it's something that's gonna stay with us long term. And this is our main challenge and goal right now, is to make sure that Kyiv Independent support and financial model and also audience is something that will be here in years to come. So one things I wanted to highlight before in my presentation is that how our approach is different and why I think we managed to get that audience pretty quickly. I think it's speed and being present on the platforms. So we have quite a unique format where we publish stuff, we call it news feeds, where we publish it in just a paragraph of news. And we also do this on the website, and we share it on social media natively. We don't put a link. And that worked pretty well when people needed information super quickly. They didn't have time to go to your website, which they don't know. They just wanted to consume information where they are. That's why we gave them these news bites on Twitter, on Telegram, on Instagram, everywhere we could. And that gave us a lot of speed, despite, getting speed while combining that balance of fact-checking and so on. Important point I wanted to make is that I think why we have trust from our audience is that we do hold power accountable, despite supporting Ukraine's fight against Russia. So recently we published a big investigation about the misuse of power in the Foreign Legion, and we were expecting a lot of backlash actually, but the support we got was very positive. You see, this kind of excellent critical journalism is possible in Ukraine, and it would never ever be possible in Russia. And it got a lot of that kind of comments is very popular there. So I think staying remaining who you are, even amid war, was super important for us, and I think this strengthens our case for trust. And the last point I wanted to make, and I think we'll discuss it during the panel, is that so this war is very different from what was happening 30 years ago, right? It's not about just access to information. What was Mark telling before, it's about how do you curate the information flow, and how do you build a narrative upon that your people will, your readers will understand, because everyone has a smartphone, everyone is able to build its own narrative, but the role of media here is to understand which narrative is correct, which narrative is tunnel one and does not represent the bigger picture, and that's what we generally do. Thank you. I would pass the word to the next speaker.
Thanks. There's lots of things to pick up. I'm not sure. Can you just click the next slide and we'll see who the next speaker is? It's like a game show, this. Yes, it is Alina, who I introduced before, so I won't do it again. But Alina, yeah, your perspective.
Hi, I work at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty as a digital strategy manager, and Radio Free Europe is RFRL is the media organization with newsrooms that report in 27 languages across 24 countries, and these countries where the free press is either banned by the government or it's not fully established. And in this country, so we have including these newsrooms that are super local. So it's like surrogate local media that's covering the local stories. And in each country we have local names. So I'll be talking today about how we partnered with Trusting News on establishing, how we partnered with Trusting News and our journalists and newsrooms to establish the trust with Hungarian newsroom, Sabat, and Sever Sebereali, which are the local Russian newsrooms that are targeted at the region, the north of Russia and Siberia. So our goal with this, our goal was to expand and deepen the loyalty and to build and bring the new audiences. So we wanted to help our journalists and newsrooms to tell who they are, what are their missions, and what are their values, and be open and transparent, because there are many questions about our funding. So we wanted to tell about that, to introduce ourselves to our communities and talk about our news values. So how we did it with Trusting News. We introduced and reintroduced our newsroom to the community. We helped our journalists to share about themselves. And we wanted to shift the mindset from, we will tell you what you need to read and know, but for more, what do you want to know? And we are here to tell you the story. And also we wanted to explain the way we work, that it's the team's mission and the historical background of our organization. So the first thing that we did in Hungarian newsroom is we redesigned the About Us page, because what happens to About Us pages is that's some corporate message there, and no one knows where this About Us page is located. Usually it's some long text. So what we did is we did, first of all, we changed the formats about it. We added what our audience wanted to know, the questions. So if you see the formats, we sort of video infographics, the questions they are asking, how we are funded, and other information on our newsroom. And another thing that we did is we surveyed the audience, because we wanted to know their informational needs. Again, to build the trust, we need to know what the audience want to know. And our Hungarian newsroom was launched in 2020, so it's all digital first. But before reporting, we wanted to know the topics the audience was interested in. And we had a survey that's around 1,400 people responded. We distributed it through our newsletters, through social media, through personal reach, and we got answers from our audience, what topics they're interested. We made this cloud about the topics they want to learn about, and we used also the video to distribute.
Kommentek, üzenetek és reakciók. A tőled kapott visszajelzés rengeteget segít abban, hogy fontos és érdekes cikkeket találj nálunk. Készítettünk ezért egy rövid kérdőívet, hogy elmondd a véleményed rólunk. Így tudunk a mindennapjaidat meghatározó témákkal cenzúrázatlanul foglalkozni. Köszönöm, ha válaszolsz, és ne felejtsd el megosztani a linket.
As it was in Nic's slide, the trust in media in Hungary is very low, and it's a authoritarian country where the free press is banned, and it's very hard to function. So we wanted to know what audience want to know and what can we provide for them. So this was one call out that we learned, and when we are publishing the articles alongside them, we were putting, these were the topics you were interested in, that's why we are covering. And another initiative that we wanted to we created there is engaging the community, because to build the trust, it's very important to engage with them directly and ask them questions. So we created the Facebook group for the community, where we are asking before the reporting, again, this is the topic that we want to cover. Do you have questions? Which angle would you be interested? And after we do the reporting, we also share there and get some feedback. So it's a good communication with the local community, but also we do cover the topics that they are interested in. And you can see here, I share the translation, that thank you for the questions. Here is the interview, and usually people do comment. And then we know also how to proceed with the next reporting. Other newsroom, these are Russian news from Sever and Siberiali. Here, there was a bigger challenge, because how we going to tell who we are and who our journalists are in the country where, with not only declining trust in the news, but there is a danger of showing our journalists or showing, putting their voices on, and So the solution was that we want to tell that these are local people. Again, in Russia, there is Siberia and Sever are overlooked because in Russia, the huge focus on the news in Moscow and St. Petersburg and these big cities. So we wanted to say that these are the journalists who are by risk, taking risks, they are covering the locals, and they are from these places. So the solution was that we did get quotes from the journalists telling about themselves, their mission, their values, why they are doing this. But again, we cannot show their faces. We cannot put their voices on. So we just took the quotes and we showed the footages, the reporting they do, and on the background, other journalists were reading their quotes. So I'll play this video.
Done. Just the next.
Настоящая Россия – это и самые дальние ее окраины. Мы – Сибирь реалий. Мы пишем о реальной жизни, такой, какая она есть сегодня.
So
Я пишу о том, как нарушают права человека.
I'm writing about how the human rights
Мы
are
говорим о реальных, повседневных проблемах.
I'm covering the news on human rights in the north.
Сталкиваются с безразличием чиновников.
Нам интересны обычные люди и
We are interested in regular people, and when the people are talking that my text helped them to solve the problem, I'm understanding why I'm doing
в
this.
этих городах и рассказывают о том, что происходит на их малой родине. Они хотят, чтобы жизнь в их городах становилась лучше.
Мы рассказываем про героев нашего времени, про тех, кому не все равно.
Нас читают абсолютно разные люди. У всех у них свои проблемы, и мы готовы рассказать о них. Будьте с нами.
So we use this video not only to tell that we live here, the journalists that are covering, we live here and we are covering the topics, but also please do contribute, co-author with us, send us your reporting, and we're going to do it. Again, it helps us to report on these regions, but also to invite them to participate in the reporting. And this is about...
Это не только Москва.
It's the similar one, but on Siberia
Настоящая
and
Россия – это
Sever.
и самые дальние ее
And
окраины.
again, just to say that we are covering that.
Север реалий. Мы говорим о
It was the animations that we were calling them to engage and participate through the social media. So we had different forms for the people to reach out through social media, through the emails, and they were sending us their questions, they were sending us their reporting, and in animations we are also showing, like if you see this one that we created and we were distributing, we wanted it to be representative of the people who are there. And again, it's not only the Moscow people or one type of people, so we created this with the aim of inclusion and reporting, and also to include our communities to report with us.
Great, thank you. Some really inventive ways of thinking about it there, and also some just practical and very audience-focused ways of thinking about trust and how to involve audiences and communities. So, Adéla.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Nic, for the word. I'm very honored to be here today to talk to you. I'm also a bit stressed out about falling of this high chair. You can see that I'm on the clumsy side, so the threat is real. So please be generous with me during my presentation. My today's talk is about the cyber activism and about the impact of the cyber elves on the media. Can you help me? Sorry. Next slide, please. Let's start from the very beginning. The cyber activism is on the rise. This is partially due to our shift from the offline into the online world, which was even accelerated during first the pandemic of COVID-19 and then during the war in Ukraine. There are many types of cyber activists. You might have heard of the anonymous, of the hacktivistic movement, who are using cyber attacks to kind of as their main of cyber activism, and then there are the cyber elves. Next slide. These cyber elves are a specific type of cyber civic activism operating anonymously in semi-closed communities, primarily in Central and Eastern Europe countries, monitoring and countering primarily Russian-led information and cyber operations. Next slide. You are predicting my thoughts now. Wow, amazing. The story of these cyber elves starts in 2014 in Lithuania, where the group of about 20 people were watching with growing caution the increase of Russian-led information operations in their virtual space. Now, in 2022, we are talking about the movement of lower thousands of people spread across the majority of countries in Central and Eastern Europe, making it efficiently the biggest cyber activistic movement of its kind in the entire world. Next slide, please. There are quite a few roles that the elves are taking upon themselves in countering Russian information operations. They are the memetic warriors who are countering Russian disinformation narratives on social networks using memes and humor. They are the elves in suits who are using legal tools to target those who are breaking the law in the service of Kremlin. However, when it comes to the journalists, the most important are the cyber scouts and the double agents. Those are the elves who are dedicated to going through open sources, such as social networks, such as chain emails, such as disinformation media platforms, and gather information on the strongest disinformation narratives in that respective virtual space of that given country. These narratives, next slide please, are then translated into annual reports that the elves are preparing. This is an example of the reports prepared by the Czech elves. You can see that they identified 7 main disinformation narratives. Most of them were concerning Ukraine that they wanted to share with the public. The second way how the elves across Europe are aiding the journalists is using open source intelligence, helping them to figure out some of the things or questions if that particular journalist wish to engage with the elves and ask them for help. However, thank you. However, the situation has changed with the war in Ukraine, and the role of the elves towards journalists has grown even stronger. They have still maintained their primary initiative to looking for the strong disinformation narratives, publishing those, and through that efficiently helping to pre-bank those narratives and prevent them from becoming the part of the mainstream discussion. However, a new feature that the elves were offering to journalists was real-time verified information from the first front, which they were publishing either on their social media platforms or transferring directly to the journalists that they have already been in a cooperation with. This helped quite a few journalists to get quick, real-time verified information about what was going in Ukraine. I wanted to share with you quite a few other things that the elves were doing to aid the Ukraine, not necessarily that are connected to the journalist work, but just to give you a bigger idea of what these movements are capable of. Using the open source intelligence methods, they were able to gather useful intelligence on the movements of Russian troops or about the technology and weapon systems that they were using. They were quite heavily involved in the investigation of those monsters involved in the crimes with Bucha. There are quite a few other cooperations with journalists, with intelligence agencies, with members of armies of NATO and Ukraine that currently, due to the nature of their work, can't be shared with you. Some of them will not be shared with public ever. However, I just think, and this is the idea that I would like to leave you with to end up on more positive side, is that there is army of thousands of invisible warriors who are fighting the information war for us and with us, and I believe that it's a reassuring feeling to have an army of cyber elves in our back. And that's the end of my talk, so you can just go to the thank you slide. Thank you. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks very much, Adéla. Absolutely fascinating. This whole army of cyber elves is something I had no idea about. But it's really interesting, isn't it, to see how they are partly doing similar work to journalists in terms of fact-checking, verification. These are particularly in terms of the war of Ukraine. Maybe I just kick off with that thought. So there's a lot of people trying to verify information. I'm interested to know whether it actually builds trusts or change minds. Is there any evidence that the sort of fact-checking that you do at the Kyiv Independent changes minds, or is it just reinforcing the views of people who want to believe?
So we don't have a particular agenda to change mind in one way or the other, right? We report on the war. Mostly, and
you're driven by facts and evidence.
Exactly. So if that changes the perception on something, then well, that's how journalism works. So, for example, that investigation that I mentioned, yes, it showed some misuse of power in the Foreign Legion arm, right? That's not a good example of how what could happen. But at the same time, we got some comments of like, why you shouldn't publish like stuff like that harms Ukraine. But if the Foreign Legion is filled with on that part is filled with some corruption and misuse of power, that first of all is benefiting Russia, not Ukraine. So it depends on the perspective you're taking. But we are not trying to set the narrative before we do the work of journalism.
Right. Do you think that independence builds trust? Do you think it is that independence, particularly because it's a real issue at time of war, right? To the extent to which you feel you can be critical.
I think so, right? I think it's important for our readers to know that we are, owned by ourselves. So that's the difference between the Kyiv Post, for example, and Kyiv Independent, is that the ownership is not in the hand of one person that is like not part of the organization. It's owned by the team. And that, I think, is giving us a lot of freedom, and we are transparent about that, and I think people appreciate it. So, I mean, I think, yes, that's why we have independent word in our name.
Adéla, just on the cyber elves, I mean, they, as you were talking about, they're starting off with an agenda about exposing, Russian propaganda. Are they independent in terms of the way in which they approach the verification? Can they be independent?
So the cyber elves are a grassroots movement, meaning that they were not established by any higher power. And of course, the question that comes to my mind or comes to the mind of those who are trying to argue against me is who will watch the watchers? What makes the elves trustworthy and credible? And I would say that there are quite a few sources that can be found on the internet, and I believe that if you check those sources and they align with the messaging and with the narrative of the elves, then that is this higher control that what they are saying is truth. Also, I would like, to my mind, and I have spent 2 years researching this movement, I just can't think of any side motives for them trying to manipulate the truth, partially because reputation is such a valuable thing, and once you lose it, then it's beyond repair, or not beyond repair, but to repair it takes ages. So I think that it's for the good of the elves as well to kind of be able to deliver the best work they possibly can.
Alina, on the question of independence and motives, quite often the people who you're trying to persuade don't necessarily have a positive opinion of Radio Free Europe. And I guess that's one of the things you're trying to address by being more audience-focused, to sort of win the trust first, and then they will maybe believe the fact-checking that you do afterwards more strongly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. First of all, we are very transparent. We have editorial independence. This is we are funded, but we have editorial independence, so this is the first thing.
But
and the
do
second
people
thing
believe
on
you? Do people believe that, or is that something you're trying to change?
This is something we are explaining, we are transparent about it, but in terms of reporting, we are focusing not on, again, like as Zakhar said, we are reporting on the war. We have Ukrainian service that's doing great job there, but in terms of what the audience want, it's not like, this is the things, again, we are changing from this parent kind of a newsroom telling this is what you should know about the war, these are the topics we are covering, and again, we are not talking about the narratives, everything is balanced, but we are not saying this is the topics you need to know. We are also asking, and Ukrainian service and all other services are doing great job in community engagement, asking questions, because sometimes it might be, again, some solution journalism. It's not only this happened, but what do you want to know? How can we help? What information we can find for you, for Ukrainians, anyone affected by the war? So it's very much mixed with that also the needs of the audience, not on how to cover, but what would they like to know, and then. And
I'm interested in that idea of building community as well, which is obviously something that digital can do in kind of real time. I mean, Zach, to what extent do you think that that trust is also about the community, or you know, your super fans helping to spread what you do as well, and the conversations that you have?
I think that's super important for us to have this core community that are ready to support us, not only by a good word, but also financially. That gives us a lot of flexibility, and we are trying to give them back is some special attention of, you know, getting them a chance to talk to us more often. So we just yesterday had a quarterly editorial meeting with our members, and that's a new format we just tried, just to get some perspective of what they think. But I think yes, it's super important for us. One thing I wanted to mention on you know, trust and building trust is that I think we media should not be afraid to take a stand, but we need to be very clear that it's our stand, right? So we do run editorials that are very clearly trying to give a thought that, you know, Russians should get out of Ukraine. But we are very transparent about that. There's nothing bad in this. I think there is a big risk in having some sort of a fake balance which you want to bring that would, you know,
once you've made that stand, is it then possible to persuade people who think differently that they're going to trust anything else you say once you've taken that stand? Is there a danger? Is there a balance there?
I think potentially there are some risks, but you know, we are ready to take them, and I think in our case it's probably easier to take a stand because we, like, for example, in Radio Free Europe, I guess it's harder because of the funding structure and so on. In our case, since we are funded by ourselves, it's a bit easier for us to, you know, be clear where we stand. But we should be very clear that, you know, this article represents the view, and this is just our regular war reporting. It might not be pleasant for you. And I think this kind of transparency that we saw also in that investigation and other pieces we run give us a bit like deeper level of communication with our audience, where they understand like on what, you know, what stand we had, looking at our editorials, but also see that we are not afraid to report on the stuff we think is important.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to the audience in a moment, but first I wanted to just talk very briefly about the changes that we see in social media, and in this war in particular, and it's changed a lot of things, I think. But Adéla, I mean, is it getting, you know, on the one hand, you have the platforms trying to clamp down on false information. On the other hand, you have, you know, your digital elves trying to verify things. Who's winning? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And is it getting more complicated because we've got platforms like Telegram where, you know, there's less monitoring of and less understanding of what's going on?
I mean, from the elves standalone perspective, it's getting better. You've seen the map. They started on 20 people, and now there are like thousands of them. I would also say that from the general...
But there's also thousands of people trying to put out propaganda, right? So both sides have scaled up in the information war.
But the numbers were significantly worse when the movement started, standing against all of these troll farms. But I also think that just if I look at the development in the society as such, the disinformation and the information war that Russia is leading against us, it has become a mainstream topic. It has become a topic that people take seriously, that people discuss, that people want to do something about. I mean, in 2014, nobody believed us, or there was little belief that the Russian is actually doing something bad, that there is actually an cold stage of information war raging on. Disinformation was just a topic that few experts in the ivory towers were talking about. Politicians didn't take anyone seriously. There were so little funding in all of the research grants. So, I mean, I always like to end up in positive notes, so that's why I'm kind of trying to suggest that, at least from this perspective, the change is positive, and I'm hopeful that it's going to get even better in the future.
One of the things that's interesting is that I think the elves, as you were describing, are increasingly sort of trying to do monitoring and verification in, say, TikTok and Telegram. But when they're then trying to get that out to a bigger audience, they're going to use different networks, right?
That's correct. I mean, still in the Eastern and Central Europe, the #1 platform is Facebook. So they are primarily active on Facebook. They are gathering their information from all kinds of sources. Of course, then in the Russian-speaking audiences is primarily Telegram or Kontakte. However, maybe it is just worth mentioning something that I try to suggest in my presentation, that I picked this aspect of the elven activities in relation to you, the journalist, but really the scope of what they are doing is much broader, and is not limited just to open source intelligence or verification.
And Zach, are you doing? I mean, a lot of what you're monitoring presumably is in a range of networks, but the communication out is quite often using Twitter, as you showed, right? So tell us about, how do you? So do you have specialists who are basically monitoring all these different social networks? How's that working?
You mean, how do we gather?
I'm really interested in what's changed in terms of the networks that are important that you monitor, and how that's different from the ones in which you're trying to persuade people or show people what's true and what isn't true.
So most of this, like I was showing in my slide, this is a pretty much like people like to call it a TikTok war. It's also a Telegram war. It's a very popular platform in Ukraine. It always gets more popular during some sort of crisis, just because of the nature of the platform, because of the little internet bandwidth it takes, or because of the speed of information. So a lot of stuff is happening there, and we are, paying a lot of attention to those networks. When social media play a lot of significance here in terms of how do we do the data collection, but kind of classic journalism going to the front line is also a very important piece of how do we do our reporting, if that was your question.
Yeah, and Alina, I mean, how's your experience of the different networks that you need to use in different places to get your message out? Presumably you're using different solutions in different parts of the world.
Yeah, absolutely, and it depends where is the audience again. And for that, when we are starting any project or initiative, we have this exercise of persona building. So we do research, we generate some understanding of some persona, what's some situations, what's the habits of this person, where do they consume, which phone they use, and how much they pay for the data. So to know where we should go, and based on that, we are not like everywhere. We choose our platforms, and if we are talking about Ukrainian service and the war in Ukraine, we are focusing on also Telegram, and we are on Instagram. And in terms of formats, somehow the trust is associated with some high production thing, so it should be some highly produced videos. Of course, we do investigations and videos and other things, but we also were integrating this mobile videos. So the reporters in the field, they can film themselves and they send to us, and then we can use that. First of all, in engaging with the audience, we can use it in social media, but we can also then use it for some bigger piece. So we are using various formats, various platforms, but again, only with the knowledge of the audience and
audience
their needs.
First, absolutely. Yeah. Let me open this up to the audience. Lots of questions. Yeah, over there first.
Thank you. Oh, wow, okay. I didn't know that it would be this loud with the mask on, but here we are. So, like, I have a question for everyone on the panel. Like, our first speaker this morning, I think Mark, I don't know where he is, but like, he was talking about the importance of being able to sort and fact check information, and use the example of like the story that had been circulating about a box of gold teeth that had been found that like were pulled from torture victims allegedly, and like, you know, and how unlikely it is that that like would be the case when, like, you know, given all of the information that we have available to us. And yet, like, we had mainstream news organizations, especially the ones that I follow in the US and UK, who were reporting this as fact, as if like there were torture victims who had this happen. Like, how do we reconcile conversations about trust, especially in a room full of journalists and media professionals, when, like, you know, when these things are happening in real time? And I want everybody to respond to this, but especially, like, you know, for Zakhar, like, as working for the Kyiv Independent, like, you know, as one of the outlets who tweeted about this to your millions of followers, like, you know, how do we, like, you know, how do we have this conversation, like, even amongst ourselves, let alone talking about it to, like, you know, to people and disseminating this information to the public, who already, like, are suffering from a crisis of trust in media.
Okay, so it's a question about, you know, how you balance, particularly in a war, real-time information, speed, and trust, and if you make mistakes, how do you deal with it?
So first of all, I'm not sure if we tweeted it. Maybe we did. I don't know all the tweets we did.
The tweet is 18 hours old, so it was tweeted
I think
out.
one thing is important to understand is that we all make mistakes. It's the question, how do you deal with them later? It's really important. Like, we do publish corrections. Also, we do that on Twitter as well. So if there is something wrong, we know it was wrong, we publish corrections additionally to the tweet. And it's super important. Like, you don't just, you know, delete stuff and try to make sure that everyone forgot about it. You try to go with corrections. I think that's really important, and especially like I mentioned, right? The information flow is super high. How do you balance the speed versus the factuality of reporting? Kyiv Independent is rarely the first one to report something. But
okay, so I was going to ask about that. So the fundamental principle is you want to get it right more than you want to be first.
Yes, exactly.
But
and that's
mistakes are made, and if you do, you need to be transparent about it. Alina?
So Mark is my colleague, and we do a lot of reporting on Ukraine. So the first thing that I agree also, we do come with corrections, but one thing is troubleshooting, but we also put a lot of effort in avoiding this. So we also, because again, it's so hard to compete with the people who are just doing speed. We do check, and we do have a rule of second eye. Nothing goes on social media anywhere without someone like else in the newsroom checking. But we also have this rollouts, planning, and how to put out. So we do have a lot of efforts how to avoid this kind of thing. So we do, if there is any kind of investigation or any kind of news, we do roll out that goes on how it goes to social media, to the website, and other things. So we try to align and check. So we are working on the both sides of it, but of course it's a big challenge.
It's a huge challenge. I'm going to move on because I want to get through as many questions as possible, so we'll have another one down here first.
Hello, I'm an Erasmus scholar of European politics and society, and you know, I did my thesis apart on this social media, I mean, as a social media analyst, and my question is, you know, meme market is actually a big stock for political campaign as well. Like, we have seen this during the Trump campaign. And here now maybe we are talking about, like, in Ukraine war with the meme, we are actually putting some kind of information and getting the support and reaching to our audience. But on the other side of the world, like in Global South, maybe for a meme, houses are being burned. So how actually do you balance? Like, maybe somebody put a meme there on Facebook, and this, like, the political parties use those memes for their campaigns. So isn't it actually giving more scope to the yellow journalism rather than, you know, taking the focus from the stories? I mean, my question is for Adéla, and it's a humble question, you know. I know this is in a very beginning phase with this meme market, but
so we're talking about memes. We're talking about the power of memes.
Yeah, the power of memes. How do you deal with this? This is like, we have seen this with political cartoon before, but do you think the meme are taking the social media space of political cartoons and the other side? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for the amazing, humble question. I'm really sorry if houses are being burned somewhere over a meme. That's just a terrible world to be living in. However, I believe that like any technology and any means of communication are neutral, and it is up to us how we use it. They are not inherently either bad or good. And from my perspective, and from the perspective of my research, I regard memes as just a new way of strategic communication, not necessarily just strategic communication, but now it's an emerging discipline in strategic communication, this memetic warfare, this weaponizing of memes. I think that if you look at the information contestation about the war in Ukraine, the memes are playing a very crucial part. I think that in some regards they are, especially in the younger generation, they are helping to gain a lot of support for the Ukraine, especially among the younger Western generations. I also feel, and support me on this if you don't agree with me, or like support me if you don't agree, that doesn't make sense, but from my perspective, I think that humor is a genius weapon. I mean, it opens so many doors and hearts, and it makes things so much more comprehensible. I mean, if I just look at some of the tweets, for example, of these cyber elves, then, if you compare like a long, boring, but very important post, and then and the engagement and the amount of response you get to that, and if you look at the same numbers for like a very fun meme, then it's a completely different story. So I believe that we are living in a fast world where people are looking for fast answers. We are looking in the world where people hate to get bored. They want to be entertained, amused, shocked. And we are living in a world where people hate to read.
Yeah, so I think memes is a fascinating area. It's also one which is challenging for journalists, right? So it's a particular issue in terms of what how journalists respond to memes. But Alina,
yeah, I want to add to this is because you're saying about fun and these things, but should we compromise our editorial standards? No, if it's about the content which is sarcastic and might. Then no, but if we are talking, because there is a lot of discussion also, should journalists go to TikTok? There's like 1 billion active users. It's hard to ignore. We do go there. We take security concerns. We go there. We use platform native things, subtitles and things. But we still can report. We still can stay journalists. We are using this. Formats, but we are still journalists. We are reporting fairly. So I think this is about balance and having, again, like some standards and discussion within the newsroom. And I wouldn't go to humor, which is, again, not in terms of if it's something sarcastic and things. So we can use these things. We can use them within our standards without compromise.
Okay, we're running out of time. Very quickly, Zach, and then we'll take one more question. Yeah.
One quick remark on this, I think, is that media do not control information space. Like, time is past. The memes are not really the strong side of media, and there is no way we can control that narrative or set some standards there. It will just exist without whether we want it or not. So I don't think memes is something that media could be their shining spike or something. It's more about maybe explaining the context of the meme. We will not be able to compete with those who are able to tweet 50 memes an hour.
It's back to that curation and context stuff again. Yeah, just the final one here.
Hi, I'm Thomas. I'm a journalist with an Austrian daily newspaper, and I have two questions. The one is to Adéla, and that is, how do you deal with, let's say, the gray area when it comes to this cyber elves movement or anonymous on this, where maybe you can also be fed intelligence information. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying this for journalists, especially in a war situation. There is intelligence information. There is declassification of information. We saw that recently with basically the Americans declassified a report that the Ukrainians blew up Dugina, the daughter of Dugin, and in Russia. So I'm wondering, how do you deal with that you can be sure at least what you get is, where it comes from.
Right.
from the elves? And the number two question is a very simple one, because working in Ukraine, I'm always wondering why my contacts still use Telegram. I don't even want to use WhatsApp, because I don't trust this media company so much, and go for Signal. So I'm still surprised, because it's a lot of data these companies get. So this still surprised me that we're still talking about Telegram being used in Ukraine.
Okay, so two quick questions, probably Adéla one and then Zach for the second one. Yeah.
So I think that what you are talking about is this threat of exposure. It has two sides, right? Like, how can we prevent that the elves don't leak any intelligence information to the journalist and it doesn't get published? So I would say that this whole panel is of trust, right? And I would say that to some extent we just need to trust that the cyber elves are smart enough not to leak dangerous information to the journalist. We should also believe that the journalists, and I mean kudos to you guys, are smart enough to be able to distinguish like sensitive information, not to publish it. So I believe that there is like this two levels check, but of course nothing is perfect and never is. And at the same time, like, how can the journalists believe to the information that they are being provided? So again, I would say that usually before you, or when I was trained as a journalist, so the first rule was never to publish anything that you have just one source upon, right? So usually if you receive an information, either it somehow like fits in the greater scheme of things and it makes sense, or you have one or two more people to ask and check and say, hey, I have heard this, like, does it make sense? Is it believable? And I think that's the brief answer I can give you before Nic cuts me off.
You know me so well.
So Telegram. So I think regarding Telegram, there are two important facets of Telegram we should understand. There is a messenger and there is a media platform. And we would not use Telegram to discuss investigations, for example. But this is the place where people are getting their vital information about the war and how it's going. This is how I learned that the war started, from a message in Telegram. And for many millions of people, that was how it worked. So that's why we have to be there, because this is where Ukrainians are, and this is where they consume information. And because of the structure of that platform and its popularity, this is where they get information first. Not even on Twitter or on Facebook, although for some, yes. But this is where, like, first point of information. That's why you just have to distinguish what are you using this platform for.
Just very finally, 20 seconds. This is supposed to be a practical conference. Tips and suggestions for practical things that the audience can take away to make their brands more trusted. You have 20 seconds each. One tip each of practical things that, Alina, you can go first.
I think I'm going to repeat again that be transparent and listen to the audience. And
transparency and audience focus, listening to the audience.
Support the cyber elves.
Zach.
I mean, transparency, I think, about your intentions and distinguishing what kind of content you're creating, whether it's editorial, non-editorial. Be very clear about this. I think that's one tip you probably already know about, but I will stress it out again.
Fantastic. Put your hands together for a fantastic panel, Adéla, Zakhar, and Alina.